Hello, this video is all about the Vaillant diverter valves and how they regularly leak and what you can do to stop it from leaking in the future. Now here's one. I've just taken it out of a boiler and you can see all the rust marks where it has been leaking. Now if your diverter valve is leaking, then there's not a lot you can do about it apart from change the diverter valve. Or you may be able to get a repair kit depending on which valve you have. Now if your diverter valve isn't leaking, or you just replace your diverter valve and you don't want it to start leaking, then I will show you a 5-minute maintenance which you can do, which will stop it from leaking or at least radically extend the life of it. Now I carry out this little bit of maintenance on every Vaillant boiler which I service, and it definitely does reduce the chances of the valve leaking. Now it doesn't matter whether you're a DIYer or an engineer, I would highly recommend that you do this bit of maintenance because it will definitely extend the life of your diverter valve. If you want to know how I go about replacing a diverter valve, then you'll find that video in the normal places. Let me know in the comments below what you find when you look at your diverter valve, and if you know of any reason why they start leaking. Again, let us all know in the comments because we'd be all really interested to know why they may start leaking. And don't say because it's on a dirty system, because I've fitted Vaillant boilers with a brand new system with inhibitor, all the rest of it, and yet they still can start leaking 2 years later, which is really frustrating and not a great look. At the end of the video, I'll show you a setting on your Vaillant boiler which may be turned on, which will be making your Vaillant boiler inefficient and using more gas. And if you want to see how you turn that comfort setting on and off, then make sure you stick around to the end of the video. A quick note, this comfort setting is often accidentally turned on, especially on the Vaillant boilers which have the dials on the front of them. I wanted to quickly let you know that I've made a video on 10 things that you can do which will make your system more efficient, which will reduce your gas bill. And we're all going through an energy crisis right now, so anything that we can do that's going to reduce our gas bills has got to be a good thing. And you'll find that video in the cards above now, down in the description, and also at the end of this video. Let's just quickly whiz through my intro, which I've speeded up, and then get on with that video. My name's Mark Ballard and I've been a gas registered engineer for over 20 years. The aim of my channel is to help you with your central heating and your plumbing. If you find this video useful at all, then please give me a little bit of feedback by clicking on the thumbs up, and that will also help others to find the video. You can click on subscribe if you think the video is useful, and click on the bell if you want to receive a notification the next time I upload a help video. And of course, share the video with your friends. I'd like to say a really big thank you to everybody who buys me a cup of coffee and leaves a small donation in my toolbox fund. It is really appreciated and it does really help me to make more videos which will hopefully help you. And don't forget to visit my website where I've categorized all my videos and left links to all the products and parts that I recommend. Now here's a diverter valve which has been leaking, and I've just taken it out of a boiler, and you can see down inside that motor housing where the spindle is, that has been leaking, and you can see that brown rusty water stains where it's been leaking out of the spindle. And this would have been dropping the pressure on the system, so they would have to have kept topping the boiler up. Now you can see I've fitted a new valve into the boiler, but you can see all the rust here down inside the bottom of the boiler there, where that water has been rusting away the boiler. So this particular boiler has been leaking for some time. And regularly topping up your boiler is really bad for your system, so you don't want to be doing that. Now here's another valve that it's only just started leaking, and you can see a few water stains in the bottom of the diverter valve. Now this valve I may be able to salvage by just doing a little bit of maintenance on it. Now here's another diverter valve again, and you can see when I use my long nose pliers, I push the spindle in, you can see water squirts out from around the spindle, which obviously is not supposed to happen. I could try doing a bit of maintenance on it, but I kind of feel this valve is probably too far gone and will need to be replaced. Now the first thing we need to do is to remove the motor from the diverter valve. Now this is a boiler which I fitted back in 2011, and it's been serviced, and this valve has been greased every year. And this nut I loosened straight away, and you can see it comes undone just with my fingers. But when you come to undo this nut for the first time, it is always really tight and you'll need to use a pair of grips. Now be careful when you do this because there isn't a lot of room and it's quite tricky to get the grips in there and turn the nuts, but once it's loose it should just come undone. So watch those wires on the diverter valve and obviously the pipe and the pump, which are kind of in the way. Once you've undone the nuts which is on the motor might be loose or it might not be. If it's not loose, it's because the motor is in the hot water mode where it pulls the diverter valve out, and the motor is being pulled hard up against the diverter valve body. So what we need to do is to put the boiler into central heating mode where the diverter valve pushes the spindle in. The easiest way to do this is just to press the reset button on the front of the boiler. That's the button with the picture of a flame crossed out on it. The boiler then just goes for a quick startup sequence where it pulls the diverter valve into the hot water mode. Then it pushes the spindle back in, which is in central heating mode, and that's where it goes after it's reset. And then you should find the motor is nice and loose and can easily be unclipped from the spindle. Now, depending on which motor you have in your diverter valve, you may have the motor which has the metal spindle like this one, or you may have the motor with the plastic spindle. They both connect in a similar way, but the plastic one actually clips on and off, so you've got to push it to the side to release it from the diverter valve spindle, and the metal one just slips on and off. But with both the motors, you move them to the right to release them. Once you remove the diverter valve motor, you're then able to get to the spindle. Now, you can only reach it with a pair of long nose pliers, and you can push and pull the spindle in and out. Now, I'm showing you this clip because it clearly demonstrates how the O-rings which seal the spindle dry up and start leaking. Now, I'm using my long nose pliers and it's actually really hard to pull and push this spindle in and out. And you can hear the rubber O-rings squeaking as I pull the spindle in and out. And my pliers keep slipping off the spindle because it's really hard to push it in and out where the O-rings have dried up. Now, I've made a little tool to make this job much easier, and it's just a little piece of copper wire which I've bent round to make this little tool, which makes it very easy to grease the spindle. So all I do is I dip my tip of my tool into my little pot of silicone grease and then wipe the silicone grease around the spindle like this. And then I get my long nose pliers again and just pull the spindle in and out, which will then lubricate the O-rings. I repeat this process several times until I'm happy that enough of the grease has gone up inside the valve and onto the O-rings, and then I just refit the motor and do up the nut, and of course test it for operation. Now, hopefully you heard just then that the spindle stopped squeaking, and now it's much easier to just pull the spindle in and out, and it goes in and out relatively freely now. And there you go, that one's all greased up, and hopefully it will last a lot longer now and will not start leaking. And of course I'll service it again in another year's time. Now, this is a different boiler again, and I just want to show you this clip because it shows how easily the spindle should go in and out. You can see I'm just pushing the end of it, and the spring inside the diverter valve is pushing the spindle back out again. So that's what they're like when they're new. Obviously this boiler isn't new, but the spindle still moves in and out really freely, so this system must be nice and clean and the boiler's in good condition. Once you're happy that you've greased up your spindle and it's moving in and out nice and freely and it's not leaking, you can then just refit the motor. And the plastic one, like I said, we just put it to the side and we push it to the left hand side, and it should just clip on, and you should hear a click, and then it should be secure on the diverter valve spindle, and you should be able to just pull the diverter valve in and out without the motor coming off. And then it's just a case of doing up the motor retaining nut. One last important thing we need to do is to make sure that we change the motor from being in central heating to hot water position. That will then pull the motor into the diverter valve, where we can then do the screw up tighter to make sure that the motor is fully secure. To do this, once again, we just press the reset button. The boiler will then reset, pulling the diverter valve into the hot water position first, and then changing it back to central heating. So we need to do that maybe a couple of times just to make sure that the nut is fully secure and tight. And there is no movement on the motor when the boiler is in hot water mode. We can then also look down through the top of the diverter valve where there's a little access hole, and if you press the reset button, you'll see the motor pulling the diverter valve open into hot water mode and then pushing it back in again into central heating mode. If you've not connected it correctly, you'll see the motor move in and out and the spindle stay where it is. If you have the motor that has the metal spindle, then this one is a little trickier. You do have to obviously hook it on, like I said before, but it easily becomes unhooked when you're screwing the motor back on again. So make sure that it does stay hooked on. Now, I had to put the camera down to get the screw thread started because it is a little tricky to get this hooked on and the screw thread started. But now it's started, I can now press the reset button. This will pull the motor into the diverter valve, and then I can do the thread up tight. Now I do the same again with this motor, and I'll look down through the hole, I'll press the reset button and then watch the diverter valve pushing and pulling the spindle in and out. Make sure that spindle is connected because it is very easy for that one to come unhooked. And if you're an engineer, you definitely want to check that, because you don't want to be getting a call from your customer telling you that they have no hot water, and it's just because the motor has become unhooked when you've been doing the screw up. Now if you didn't want to take the motor off, you can always just leave the motor in place, use the little tool and just put the silicone grease down through the access hole and smear it over the spindle that way. And I do this on the Vaillant Ecotec Pures because on those boilers you can't take the motor off. Now one final setting you should know about is a setting called Comfort. Most people don't know what this setting is. If you turn your hot water control all the way around to its hottest setting, you'll see that a little C comes on in the display, indicating that Comfort has been activated. You'll then see that the pump has started running, the gas valve has opened and the flame is now on, and the boiler is warming itself up. So what Comfort does is it keeps the boiler pre-warmed so that when you turn the hot tap on, it doesn't take very long for the hot water to come through because the boiler is already hot. But this also means that the boiler will be firing up during the day and night when you're not using it, keeping itself pre-warmed, just waiting for you to turn the hot tap on. Now I've turned it on my boiler and you can see that the boiler is heating itself up, and it keeps heating until it gets to 64 degrees. And it takes a couple of minutes to do that. Once it gets to 64 degrees, it will turn off and then wait for itself to cool down. And if it takes a couple of hours to cool down, it'll then come back on again and warm itself back up again, even if I haven't used the hot water. Now I've speeded this clip up so we don't have to wait a couple of minutes whilst it goes through this preheat process. But now that it's finished warming itself up, and you'll see there is a C in the display indicating that Comfort is turned on. So I always recommend having this setting turned off. And to do that, all we need to do is to turn the hot water dial all the way around to its coldest position, and then the C will then go out. You can then turn the hot water dial back round to the temperature that you want your hot water at. Now this setting may be useful if you're on a water meter, or maybe if your boiler's in an outhouse or in a loft, and then the boiler will be keeping itself warm. But again, it's keeping itself warm when you're not using the boiler, and not to mention adding additional wear to your boiler. So like I said, I always recommend having this setting turned off. That way you're going to reduce some wear on your boiler and reduce that gas bill. If you want to know more about your Vaillant boiler and the various settings on it to make it more efficient, then I've made lots of videos about the various Vaillant boilers, and you can find those links in the description below, or you can visit my website where I've categorized all my videos, and hopefully you'll be able to find the video for your boiler and make it more efficient. So that's about it then. So if you want to watch my video on 10 ways to reduce your gas bill, you can click on the video just here. And of course you can click on subscribe, you can click on the bell, give me a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and there's always my toolbox friend. Bye for now, and I'll see you next time.